Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the We Have Issues podcast. Today, we would like to bring a very special guest on, Carl Brown, coming to us from the Internet of Bugs YouTube channel. He is a software developer with over 30 years experience, and he is here to talk to us about language learning models and AI. And with that, I'm Chris.
I'm Carvell.
I'm Matt.
And just to get started, Carl, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience with software development and AI?
Sure. So I'm old. I got out of school in the early 90s. I had been doing some software work before that. My first job out of college was consultant on a plane for a company called EDS, and I flew all over the country and did software stuff all over the place. Did startups for a while, and then a couple of years ago, my daughter was in college and took a computer science class, and a bunch of her classmates were freaking out because they were afraid that AI was going to take all of the jobs. And so she was telling me this, and I'm like, okay, fine. I'll write up a blog post and explain why it's not going to happen. And she's like, Dad, no one my age will ever find or read your blog. So ended up putting up a couple of YouTube videos. I figured I would have as many subscribers as I had, as there were people in her computer class. And here I am a couple of years later. And turns out that people want to know about a realistic experience take on AI, because I have like 130,000 subscribers now on YouTube. So it's been an interesting ride.
Do you think it was your age, Carl? Do you think that's why your daughter kind of thought you didn't know what you were talking about?
Well, I mean, honestly, there aren't a lot of people my age that are on YouTube. There's a lot of people that are in their 50s that have a lot of experience that are doing, that do blogs and that they, write articles and that kind of thing. There isn't a lot of that on YouTube that I found. And so there's an entire generation of folks that don't seem to engage as much with written text, but they pick up stuff on YouTube. So it's really interesting. My analytics are kind of interesting because I've got younger folks and I've got folks my age, and there isn't a lot of in the middle kind of thing. So it's interesting.
Speaking of, different people from different backgrounds, different age groups, a lot of people hear AI and they think things like the Terminator or, like HAL from 2001: A Space Odyssey. Maybe I'm aging myself here, but but really, if you could, for our viewers, explain to us exactly what AI is and kind of how it is important in our modern society today.
I have a video about this that basically says when people say AI these days, they mean one of 6 different things. And that's actually to the benefit of the AI industry, because they can basically bounce back and forth about what they actually mean, so they can be talking out of both sides of their mouth at the same time. So it could mean what you've seen on sci-fi stuff. It could mean what some potential future computer might be able to do 100,000 years from now. It might mean what the current generation of AI products can do, which is what I'll talk about in just a second. Or it might mean what the current generation of AI is going to do in the not too distant future. Right. At the moment, the chatbots that you're probably familiar with are built on top of basically 2 technologies that are related. One of them is called the large language model, which is basically just a giant library of matrix coefficients, each one of which represents something like some combination of words. Theoretically, we don't actually, we don't really understand it at that level of detail for the most part. And then the other thing is called the transformer architecture, which is basically a way that you turn words into numbers in a way that keeps context. And then you go through the large language model to figure out what the next token or the next word is going to be. And then you turn it back into English. And so those are kind of the paper that started the current boon of AI stuff was called Attention is All You Need. And it was in 2017 or something. So we'll see what the next breakthrough is and when or if it happens. It'll happen eventually, but we don't know what it's going to be yet. But that's kind of where we are at the moment. We're in this large language model transformer kind of architecture at the moment.
What do you think that people aren't understanding about AI that's kind of leading to, the industry kind of having a monopoly on defining what AI is?
So there's a specific psychological effect that's called the ELIZA effect that started with a program called ELIZA in the late 60s, I think, where when people interact with a chat bot, they tend to think of it as being a lot more conscious and alive than it actually is. And this started happening with a really, really, really simple chat bot that like I said, was written in the 1960s. And the AI folks these days absolutely know that a chat type interface is going to lead people to think that something is more alive than it actually is. And they knew that going into this because every computer science student is taught this kind of stuff in school, right? They definitely knew that things were going to seem more alive than they actually were before they published this stuff this way. And they definitely know that that effect is the case. And so the thing that people don't understand is we are psychologically predispositioned to think of things as being alive when they're not. I mean, like, you know, people apologize to their car when they hit a pothole, right? And, you know, my daughter talked to her stuffed animals when she was little, and those are a lot less interactive than a chatbot seems to be, right? They're taking advantage of the way our monkey brains are wired in such a way that we think that things are a lot smarter than they actually are and a lot more alive and have more agency than they actually do.
It's the reason I got sad when my Tamagotchi used to die.
Yeah.
I think that with AI, the scary part is not about the chat bots, the sentence formats it can formulate and all the information it can give out, but it's how technology is improving and who's in charge of that technology and the control that appears that we have of this technology we really don't understand. Well, I meet a lot of people who are in software engineering, and even, you know, at the company I work for, they don't understand the extent of how to use AI. And the ones that do understand the extent of how to use it, I feel like that is where the danger lies beneath. A lot of people, for an example, a lot of people understand that agents are these cool concepts of within this AI space, but they don't really quite understand what agents can do and how effective they are and how they can potentially just take jobs away. Now, I'm in the belief that when technology takes some jobs away, other jobs will be created. But not everybody thinks like that. And I feel like that's more of the danger that's scaring a lot of people, is that there's a technology out there that a lot of us just don't really can't fully grasp it, but only a few of us really can. And the few, we can't really trust them. We don't really know their true intentions. Do you think that that is probably more of a pressing issue? Are we entering a dangerous space here? And will jobs be taken away?
AI is not capable of taking jobs away. There was actually a thing came out from, I want to say MIT recently. It doesn't take jobs, it takes tasks. And there are some jobs that are more task-oriented than others. Jobs will tend to change based on the tasks that are available. Understand, from my point of view, right, having done this since the 80s and early 90s, this is not the first time that something has showed up that made everybody think, all the programmers are going to go away, we're not going to need them anymore, right? COBOL was supposed to do that before I was even, doing computer stuff. When I was learning to program, we used books. We didn't have the internet didn't exist. Google didn't exist. Stack Overflow didn't. None of these resources existed, right? And so as each one of these resources has showed up, it's like, oh, people will be able to Google for it. We won't need programmers anymore. There's a thing now where, actually it's been around for a long time, where you can just include a module in your code, right? And it will go grab a networking module off the network by a URL, and it will suck it into your code, and then you can call it. So you don't have to write your own networking stack every time, right? Everybody said, oh, well, we're not going to need programmers anymore because things are just going to get tied together like that. And we've got more programmers now than ever. So my guess is, both for programmers and not programmers, that we're still going to need, junior people, right? It's just that the job of what that person does is going to be different because more of it's going to be given to the AI in a way that wasn't true before. So there was a time when there were a bunch of people who were basically typists, and executives would dictate stuff and the secretary would write it down, and they would go and they would sit down at their desk and they would type it, right? Well, nobody types anymore. We have word processors now. I mean, nobody types on typewriters anymore because we have word processors now, right? And the word processor took all those jobs away, but it's not like those people are gone, right? They just have different things to do now. They do more, appointment scheduling and, that kind of stuff. So, I expect that, and there's always a bumpy transition right? While we figure out, okay, how do we incorporate this technology into our business processes and what are the new jobs going to look like and all that kind of stuff. And we're kind of in that at the moment. Part of the problem right now, going back to kind of one of the earlier questions, is that there are a lot of people that are believing the AI hype that this thing is going to be very quickly within a year or two. They've been saying this for 5 years. Within a year or two, it's going to be just as smart as a human, and it's going to be able to do, jobs just like a human does, right? And so right now, we're not doing a good job of incorporating these technologies into our workflows and figuring out what the new jobs ought to be, because a lot of the people that are making these decisions are believing that in a couple of years, they're not going to need people anymore, and the AI is going to do it all.
Carl, I work in construction, residential construction, and this is like the one industry where people feel like we're kind of immune to the AI, automation, robotic takeover. Plumbers and electricians, I'm seeing that a lot on LinkedIn. They're advising kids to go to trade school because these trades will be around for a while, and they probably will be. I mean, they probably will be the last jobs that go out the door, but I don't necessarily think we're immune, and I think it's coming a lot sooner than they think. I mean, when you really get down to it, your typical stick-built house, if it was not for human error, could almost 100% be automated. I mean, it's literally because somebody frames a wall out of square, out of plumb, that you have to have somebody come in and cut each tile to go up the walls. If it was perfectly 8x4, you have a robot throw the tiles up the wall, and we do actually see that. We've seen painting robots, we've seen tile robots, we've seen drywall robots. Granted, they're kind of, in rough shape right now, but who knows 5 years from now. What do you see happening with the trade industry? Do you think that we're going to move in a direction where, under the guise of environmentalism, the government starts to produce more modular 3D printed housing? And do you think that the trades, or especially things like framing, anything that is very routine, do you think that's going to be going away?
The world of bipedal robots is coming. I don't know if you looked at what was going on at this last CES show, but if you look at some of the videos of that, they had a laundry folding robot, which is a thing that was not, a couple of years ago, robots couldn't do that. Boston Dynamics folks have robots that can walk around on two legs now. They've got that dog quadruped robot that some idiot put a shotgun on for reasons. Well, I guess it's okay if you're going to walk up to a thing you need to defuse as a bomb and hit it with a 12 gauge, and if it blows up, then only the robot gets hurt. So I guess that's okay. But a robot with a shotgun with a 12 gauge kind of scares me. But anyway, yeah, the whole bit about AI taking away tasks, a lot of that, if we get to the point, I expect we are going to get to the point where, at least for very repetitive tasks that don't have a lot of exceptions and creativity, like drywall hanging stuff, when we get a bipedal robot that's able to do that kind of stuff, then yeah, I'm expecting there's going to be a lot of disruption in the trades. In general, the more custom something is, so like the coming into the house where there's a water leak and figuring out where the water leak is and figuring out how to patch this particular pipe in the least intrusive way kind of thing. I think that's going to be a lot longer before the robots are able to do that. But the world of bipedal robot manual labor is coming, and that's going to be scary on a lot of fronts, I think. As far as the 3D printed housing stuff, I'm curious about that. My guess is that, so we have in the States a lot of not in my backyard kind of industry organizations that decide kind of what materials are allowed or are not allowed to be used in construction and that kind of thing. And you probably know more about that. And so my guess is there will be some period of time that the industry organizations try to push back on some of that technology, the same way that we, in the same way that we have a lot of cities and a lot of towns where the municipal regulations say you can't make the kinds of walkable neighborhoods that exist in Europe, where you've got, a coffee shop on the bottom and you've got apartments above it and that kind of thing, because a lot of, we have these regulations that are like, you have to have, single family home neighborhood kind of things. And so my guess is there's going to be some amount of time when probably some of the rest of the world, especially China, is able to do 3D printed houses in a way that we're not going to be able to do, at least in most of the regulated areas. Out in the deserts of New Mexico, they do all kinds of weird crap. But yeah, I think we're going to have disruption is going to come, and that's going to be scary from a societal standpoint. If you take a bunch of young, very fit guys, right, who are suddenly unable to find work and they don't have any way to make money, and they don't really have any prospects, that's not a recipe for a calm society. And there have been a number of societies in history over time where arguably, I mean, there are people that
Lord
say,
men, yes.
yeah, I mean, there are people that I've read that basically said that at least one of the Crusades was created because basically there was a surplus of men that didn't have any prospects and they needed to figure out something to do with them. If we get to the point where manual labor is not a thing anymore, at some point we as a society are going to have to figure out, I mean, like you said, you're an Andrew Yang guy, whether it's, universal basic income or some other kind of safety net or something, having a mostly disgruntled population that doesn't have any prospects is never going to be good for anybody. So we're going to have to figure something out at some point. And the bipedal robots are coming. I don't know how long it's going to be, but they're going to get here eventually, and the prices are going to start coming down, and the lines are going to cross, and things are going to get nasty. But my guess is that's going to be a while out, and I'm more worried about the white-collar stuff right now. But yeah, I think that's coming.
I think some of their arguments is tokens and stuff, and kind of how we progressed over the years and the amount of tokens, right? Yeah, I was reading something that Claude could basically generate enough tokens to read the Bible, right? But then give it a couple years, Claude would be able to make something where you'll be able to generate enough tokens where you could have a whole lawyer's office or a whole bunch of documents from a hospital that is compiled much bigger than a Bible, right? And I think that's, from my understanding, and I could be wrong, from my understanding, that is kind of how they justify the timeline and stuff. And so when you have all these documents and AI could actually read the document and just like that, have agents move things, use Longchain and a bunch of other technologies. In a sense, AI actually will be smarter than the human being because their touch on all the information will just be unfathomable, right?
Carvell, I think that just speaks to like AI not being smarter or as smart as a human being, just more knowledgeable. A dictionary is more knowledgeable than I am.
Well, that's the thing about it, right? So it technically is, right? So if you think about not right now, but...
Okay, so let's level set this for a second, right? We don't know what smart means.
Okay.
Right. We say that word. We talk about it like we know what it means. We've tried in many different ways to measure smart, right? That's how we get like IQ tests and that kind of thing, right? But I mean, that the kinds of things that are measured on standardized tests don't necessarily translate exactly to the ability to get things done in real life, right? People that are better at taking tests than they are at actually getting crap done, right? And so we don't really know exactly what we mean when we say smart, right? We just have this kind of intuitive understanding that we've never really needed to nail down before, but now we do, right? And so it's really easy, and this is true of the word AI, and it's true of a bunch of other terms that we're just kind of throwing around like we know what they're talking about, but in this context we really don't. When we argue past each other a lot because we have different kind of intuitive understandings of what we think smart is and the difference between smart and knowledgeable and that kind of stuff. And so it makes it really hard for us to have productive conversations about this. It makes it really easy for the AI companies to take advantage of the fact that, we don't have really good definitions of all this kind of stuff and everything is really fuzzy. And so they can say things like, well, the AI is going to be equivalent of a PhD in every subject when, that means that basically it can pass multiple choice tests as well as a PhD can. That's not necessarily everything that a PhD can do. You know what I mean?
One thing I want to kind of backtrack a little bit on that you were talking about, Carvell, and that you were talking about, Carl, is the use cases of AI and, how managers and CEOs might view AI. Is this what we're seeing with the success of Claude, for instance, and the failure of OpenAI, where Claude started to get really specific on the sorts of tasks that they wanted to focus on, and that's their business model. Whereas OpenAI is like, oh, we're Sora, oh, all these other things. Like, we do everything. I can't raise a baby without AI. Whereas OpenAI is really, they're just bullshit, right? Basically. And then, but there are very good use cases. I've always felt like if you focused on coding with AI, that can really help programmers, not replace them, but help them with accomplishing their tasks. Medical coding, that's helped workflows at hospitals. I think I've seen one where there's an AI that models proteins and folds proteins.
Right.
That's helping them with that, and that's very, very useful.
That's different, though.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so let's unpack some of this. So first off, the protein folding thing, right? So there are kind of general purpose AIs like large language models, right? And then there are specific bespoke trained AIs that do specific jobs. And that's things like folding programs, playing chess, playing Go, those kinds of things, right? And that's a different kind of, there's some similarities, but that's a different kind of AI than what we're talking about with chatbots. And the companies love to confuse things and say, well, they're a lot better at chess than any human is going to be, and so therefore they're going to be a lot better at everything else than humans going to be. And it's like, no, that's not the case, because there's very strict rules about what is good in chess and what means a win in chess and what is and is not possible in chess. And those things don't exist in life. And so there are things that it's a lot easier to train them on than things that it's not really easy to train them on. As far as the kinds of things that the general purpose AIs are good at, they're good at things that the consequences of getting something wrong are not that hard or not that important. And the way I describe it is basically AI makes easier things easier and faster and harder things harder. So let me give you an example. When you're texting on your phone, you're a lot less likely to send a misspelled word, but you're a lot more likely to send the wrong word. In a world where there isn't an AI, you're a lot more likely to send a misspelled word, and the person on the other end is going to see that it's misspelled, and they're going to go, oh, okay, I know what he meant. But when the AI corrects it to the wrong word, and then the person looks at it and they're like, okay, I don't understand what that was supposed to mean, right? Because they get the wrong signal. They get the signal that that you intentionally picked that word when in fact you didn't. You know what I mean? And so it makes, the things that normally would be easy are easier and they're faster, but that consequence of that is that more complicated stuff can get harder. Because you didn't think through all of the easy stuff to start with. And so you didn't think through the implications. And so now this thing happens and you're not like in a mental space where you realize, oh, okay, that's a thing I'm going to need to take care of. And so when the complicated thing happens, you're like, okay, now let me figure out what I need to do in order to figure out what's going on with this and how to fix this. And it takes you a lot more effort at that point than it would if you had been doing the whole thing manually the whole time.
One thing I do want to point out, Chris, is that these companies, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, there we go.
Yeah, Google Gemini, Anthropic, Claude.
They actually care more about the big money than the little money, which is us. People like us that go on ChatGPT, maybe pay for a subscription. When these guys, and we've talked about this before on our podcast, when these companies, when they go public, and they get large, a lot of the stuff that we're playing with right now, we're probably not going to have access to like in a couple years unless we paid good money and stuff. That's just how the world of going public goes, right?
Well, that's how subscriptions, that's how that came to be.
Yeah. So I say that to say, like, kind of what I'm pointing to is that, a lot of these companies, their bigger focus is with government contracts. Their biggest focus is with bigger companies, right? So for an example, we know Microsoft has a bid in ChatGPT, and Microsoft also has Copilot, and Copilot is doing its own things. And OpenAI has got, money from Microsoft, and that's the big money they're talking about, right? I think one of these things that I kind of been iterating to is like, we get an idea of what AI is and what it can do, but then there's another space, especially in the enterprise space, where it's being used completely different. And it's different on how we as individuals see it working. And in my opinion, sometimes to me, that's what's scary. For an example, Claude recently had a contract with the U.S. government because Anthropic is trying to be one of those good companies that says, hey, we're going to have all these guardrails so that the U.S. government doesn't break the rules. Well, Anthropic got mad because the U.S. government was trying to break the rules. And so they didn't end up going into contract with the government. Instead, OpenAI said, hey, I'm jumping right in. I'm right here. And then the government sets up a contract with OpenAI. And in a nutshell, it's stuff like that that's happening that, we don't know to the extent how they're going to be helping the government. I mean, we know about some of the research is being done, but that's what the scary part is, and that's something that we're not seeing that a lot of people could complain about.
I think what you'll find if you take a look is that the biggest companies in terms of revenue and market cap and stuff are consumer-facing companies. Your Apple, your Meta, your Google, those kinds of things, right? We have military contracting companies. They're not that big. They don't have that much money. And I'm not saying that government contracts are not going to be part of it, but the amount of money that they're spending and the amount of money that it's going to take to keep these AI companies afloat, I don't think that just government contracts are going to be able to cut it. I think that the person that's going to get the most money out of it is going to be the company that really nails what we call the B2C space, the consumer-facing stuff, right? As far as the government stuff being scary, I mean, yes, but one of the biggest problems I would argue and have been arguing that we have as a society is the way that everybody has gotten isolated into their own little information bubble. And the way that you get your news and the way that social media curates what you see on the internet, be that Google or Facebook or Twitter X or whatever, everybody's kind of, people aren't exposed to things that aren't reinforcing their viewpoint. You get a bunch of people that can't even have a conversation because they can't agree on basic facts. That's, in my opinion, very scary, right? And that is not a thing that AI has really gotten its hooks into yet. And the more we get fake video and the more we get, fake audio, and the more that we get people that are trying to use AI in order to try to, isolate you so that they can run ads against you, that kind of thing, the more isolated from each other and the more polarized a society I think we're going to get. And I'm honestly more afraid of that than I am. I'm not saying I'm not afraid of what they're doing with the government, but I'm more afraid of isolating different people into their own little bubble so that everybody's, voting based on information that was made up by some AI rather than voting on what's actually happening and what facts are actually there, right? I'm a lot more scared of that than I am, because we are a democracy, and if we get a majority of people that are trying to vote for something that is going to cause real problems, not just for them but for everybody, because they're voting on bad information, that's not a thing that we're going to be able to solve with a government contract or whatever, right? That's going to be a really widespread problem. Arguably, it already is a really widespread problem, and it's going to be really hard for us to function as a society and as a democracy if nobody's actually understanding what the actual facts on the ground are, and everybody is working off the virtual reality that they think is happening, but a lot of it is just stuff that AI was used to put facts in their heads or ideas in their heads.
Yeah, to piggyback on that a little bit, Carl, there was a podcast I was listening to the other day, and two of the members both are soccer fans, and I think it was ChatGPT they said, but they asked it, who is the best soccer player in the world? And it curated the answer according to, I guess, what did it pull from their search histories. So you had two different answers, and I don't remember the names because I don't watch soccer, but I found that interesting. But that's kind of like
it was Messi and what's his name? Ronaldo.
Okay, there we go. So there we go. But that's kind of like you were saying, Carvell. It's curating to a consumer experience.
Well, yeah, that's something that, I mean, as Carl pointed to, that's something that it's just probably going to get worse. I mean, honestly, though, like we've been seeing this, we're a little bit prepared for this because we've seen it, especially being a millennial or a Gen X, that we've seen people try to lie and put fake ads and stuff. The issue with the way way I see it going now is that some of the material now is so real, you can't tell the difference, right?
Oh, my mom, man, I have to all the time look at that. Like, just look at it closely.
Yeah.
Hey, speaking of those kind of AI slop videos, that's, kind of where the common person seems to have the most anti-AI views. It's either the chatbots, like you were bringing up earlier, or, just having their Facebook feed spammed with videos of grizzly bears at front doors and things like that, But
I like when the cats bust in the room with the banjo. I like that.
But, should people be afraid of AI? Should people be against AI? Should people be supporting these movements that kind of poison AI, like AI music, making it so that the stuff that the AI is building its library from is worthless junk? They poison their pictures so nobody steals their deviant art OC or whatever. You get what I mean? Should people be against AI, or should they accept AI?
So there are different AIs here, right? So the actual technology, we can throw a bunch of data at a thing and then it can find the patterns in the data and it can reproduce the patterns in the data. That's a tool. That's not for it or against it or whatever. Unlike what you've seen in the Terminator, that thing is not going to try to kill everybody because of it decided to do it itself, right? The thing that I think everybody ought to be upset about is the fact that these things are being trained on information that was effectively stolen from people that worked really hard to generate that information, and exactly for any given piece of information, exactly what the copyright should have been and exactly what compensation should be owed, and that is a different question. But fundamentally, there's a big wealth transfer, more or less, from people that spent a lot of blood, sweat, and tears creating content that now was sucked into this AI without their permission, without their understanding, in many cases via pirated books or videos or whatever. And then the AI companies are now able to generate stuff that can take away the tasks of the stock photos, stock photographers, and the journalists and that kind of stuff. And so that's a thing I think we ought to be a lot more upset about, is the fact that there are a lot of people a lot of the things that they used to get paid for are now able to be done in a crappier way, but often good enough for effectively for free by these AIs. And then the third thing that's an issue is basically, what are the people that are able to control how the AI behaves in certain situations? The people that create what are called the system prompts, the people that do the training and decide what is and isn't, what should and should not be in the training data, and what it should and should not be allowed to do. To the extent that those people have biases, and to the extent that those people want society to behave in a certain way, we should be afraid of the way that those technologies can be weaponized against the people that are not at the top of the pyramid. In terms of whether you should be afraid of AI, I mean, kind of yes, kind of no. It depends on which kind of AI you're talking about at any given instant.
Carl, I was a musician when I was younger. I guess technically I still am, but I remember when Napster came out and musicians were like, this is the greatest thing in the world. You're going to love it. This is going to be great for music. And Metallica's drummer Lars Ulrich pitched a whole fit over it, and musicians laughed at him, and then we see how that ended up. I think everybody kind of regretted that. But I use Suno. I play riffs into it and add lyrics that I've written to it, and it comes up with stuff that I could have never composed. And I realize this is all being pulled from what other artists have done, but to me, that's always been an aspect of how art is created. Techniques that Buddy Rich used on drums. Now every kid on YouTube is, just outperforming him by a long shot, because they've taken those techniques and they've incorporated them. Same thing with art. You see, I'm in buildings, so you see a house, you like the layout of it, you like how it presents on the street, so you go and you build a neighborhood of your own houses, and you tweak it a little bit here and there, but you're still taking that base idea. And so to me, that's how art has always been. It just seems like it's now offensive to the art community, because people who aren't technically artists have access to that. I don't necessarily see it that way. I see that as an opportunity for people who might not have those opportunities without the AI. Again, I talk about Suno. This is something I've brought up, the American Solidarity Party, which we all three are part of. This has come up a lot. And to me, when I was a kid, I couldn't afford studio time. I was locked in my bedroom playing these songs, couldn't get them out, angsty teenager. And I was like, if I had had something like Suno where I could have created those songs, that would have opened up a market for my product that I came up with. It would have been probably better for my mental health because I could get all these ideas out instead of feeling bottled up with them. That's how I see it is, yes, there are non-artists that are having access to this technology, and yes, it is taking ideas. I hesitate to use the word steal because we've always borrowed from art, but is it wrong of me to look at it like that? I guess I should ask, as something that's opening up the world of creativity, not closing off creativity for artists, but opening up the world of creativity to people who might just lack the talent.
So I would say it's not wrong to think of it that way in general. And in a world where the people that created the content that the AI was trained on were compensated, that would be a perfectly reasonable view to take on AI, right? In my world, I primarily deal with code, right? And so code is a less problematic kind of area because a lot of code is written, the same kind of code gets written over and over again. A lot of code is licensed in such a way that it's okay for people to take it and try to remix it into things and that kind of stuff. And so it's not, the same kind of issues don't exist. It's true that there are going to be, in the code world, in the art world, whatever, there are going to be a lot of people that can do the easier things easier. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who was saying, I've been working with this thing and it's like, wow, I got a lot more out of it than I expected to get out of it with how much I understand what's going on. This thing is kind of incredible. And I'm like, well, it is if that's your level of experience. But if if you had been working with this particular product or you'd been playing this particular instrument for 20 years and then you were trying to use the thing, you would get very frustrated with it because it wouldn't be able to do exactly what you knew you could get out of it. Right? Because it's kind of trained on the lowest common denominator kind of thing. So yes, it's very good at lifting the people that are not artists, right? Or the people that are beginners up to a kind of a lowest common denominator level of competency. But that's not necessarily the same as getting us to the point where we have more genius writers and more genius artists and more the things that we really, or at least those Gen X of us, those of us that have our, our favorite bands and our favorite singers and our favorite songwriters that have been around forever. I don't see how AI is really going to help more people at that level happen. Does that make sense? It's just, we're going to get, a much wider group of people that can't make a living at art. And the very few people at the very top that are able to make a living at art, there's going to be fewer and fewer of those. And it's just going to kind of flatten the pyramid out.
But to be fair, I mean, industries go away, all the time. Yep. With, cotton gin that took out, a multitude of workers, there's a reason there's no cobblers anymore. And so is it just, have we hit that where it's time for art it'll never go away. There'll still be people that make art on their own. But as far as art as an industry goes, is it just the natural evolution and we're there now?
So I would think not. We will see. My feeling is that what we're going to have is more of a curation problem. People are always going to seek out, and maybe not everybody, but at least the people that really care about the particular kind of art, whatever you're talking about, whether it's movies or it's music or whatever. There are going to be people that seek out specific, authentic, human created experiences, and it's going to be harder for them to find those. But my guess is we're going to have some stratified version of people that are really, really good at things, or that just got lucky and happened to go viral, and that those people are still going to be able to make a living and to still create art and to be still seen as artists, and that it's just going to be that much harder for everybody else who wants to get into that profession to be able to do that. I'm not sure what the long-term economics of that are going to be. And one of the things that we as a society don't do a really good job of, especially in America, but generally in the West, is dealing with a safety net for those folks where you trained really hard, you had a, you learned how to do this job, now that job has been automated. You're going to have to figure out how to do something else more or less on your own. We're not really going to help you, and good luck with you kind of thing, where it creates a lot of, I'm getting on my soapbox, but that creates a lot of folks that could be productive members of society, but that are having a really hard time figuring out what they can do, what new skills they could acquire, what new places, how to get jobs where they are, as opposed to having to move halfway across the country, that kind of thing. And I wish we had a better system, and honestly, more compassion for people who have worked really hard and got, automated, not necessarily out of a job, but there are fewer of those jobs now because a lot of the tasks got automated. And I would hope would be better at helping them to find another way to make a living and to be productive members of society.
I was an Andrew Yang supporter, so I'm perfectly okay with that soapbox. That's great.
I think also too, to answer part of your question, Matt, is that a lot of us still like to go to concerts, right? A lot of us still like to go to live bands. So I don't see like us sitting in front of robots, listening to live bands and be like, oh, this is cool, But I think that's one part.
Have you seen these hologram concerts they're doing these days?
I don't know. That's not going to catch on.
I mean,
you want something real, man. Like that's.
Well, to that point, and I don't want to harp on this too much longer, but so Carvell, me and my son just went to a concert, and I know how the business works. I mean, I started out, I'm not old, but when I started playing, nobody had backing tracks, and we were still using the wedge monitors on stage. But every band that we watched used backing tracks and stuff like that. And I know that's not AI. I know that's a far cry from it. But my point to that is, 10, 20 years ago, if a band was using backup tracks, everybody, oh, they're lip syncing. I don't want to see that. That's not rock and roll. But now we've come to accept it. So what is the next generation coming along?
Yeah, you got a good point there. You got a good point, because you can get like a humanoid, right? And nobody would know the difference. And you'd say like 30 years later, we'd be like, hey, look at that. I like this band, and it's just all, you got a point there.
If we look at things where this has already happened, right? So people still care about watching two human beings play chess against each other. Nobody really cares about watching, matches between two different AIs trying to play chess against each other, unless it happens to be really hilarious or, or that kind of thing. But basically, they can play games against each other really, really fast. And after a while, it's like, okay, now we know which one of them is better. We don't really care anymore. But we will still watch, two grandmasters, maybe not all of us, but, the people that care about chess will still watch human grandmasters play against each other, even knowing that both of them would get creamed by a computer, because we still fundamentally care about the human element. That's true in chess. My guess is it's going to be true in a lot of other things as well. We'll have to see. And maybe for some things that won't be the case. But my guess is that just like with chess, there's going to be some way that humans crave the human element of things that are created and people watching other people perform the skills that they've gotten good at, and that will, appreciate that. I don't think if you took AIs and you trained them on, guitar playing up until the 1960s, that they would end up creating the kinds of techniques that like an Eddie Van Halen would do. You know what I mean? There's some things that I think that the human creativity and people just sitting and playing around with the guitar and going, wow, that sounded really cool. Let me figure out, how to make music with that. I don't see the AI creating that kind of art the way that some humans have done. And I think we're always going to be craving that kind of thing, but we'll see what happens over the years.
Carl, I like how you brought up chess, because I think the chess community is a really good use case of how people have adapted to AI, because every chess master knows, like, you can't beat the AI. Like, it's just always going to be better than you. But they're like, they've redefined the purpose of chess then. Now, it used to be, you know, we're trying to solve chess. You know, we're going to make it so that we can make the perfect moves all the time. And now they're like, well, now it's kind of the blunders are part of the game now. And, you know, that's the interest. That's the intrigue between the two human competitors. And they've kind of gone into that. And I find that, you know, incredibly interesting.
Yeah. And people still watch Jeopardy, and they don't watch the computer playing Jeopardy anymore. Once we figured out, okay, the computer can win, that's cool. We don't want to see the computer anymore, but we're still interested in you know, trying to identify with the people that are on stage, trying to, you know, answer their own questions ourselves. So I think that will continue. We will see, but that's my read on it at the moment.
We talked about the personal financial consequences of AI with, you know, job losses, job reassignments, tasks, and things like that, with copyright issues where people are losing out monetarily there. One of the things that kind of, well, it gets ignored sometimes and it becomes the focus a lot of times is the environmental impact. These AI models, these companies require massive data centers to process this information, tons of processors. I mean, on the cost, we've seen the computer parts market is completely a mess right now. But more importantly, the environmental impact. Those data centers need a lot of water. They need a lot of power. That raises power demands and raises energy costs for the people that live there. The American Solidarity Party, we like to focus on environmentalism, conservationism. We want to protect our natural environment. How can we balance AI with the need to have more affordable energy and better places to live?
AI does not require a different kind of energy or a different source of energy or a different source of water. And when they talk about the water that AI takes up, the reason that they use water to cool these things is because it's cheaper than cooling it with just electricity. So you can reduce the amount of electricity you use if you use evaporative cooling and you burn off a lot of water, right? There's nothing inherently different about the way that these things burn electricity than the way that anything else burns electricity, right? So what we're doing is we're basically amplifying the problem about not getting into renewables, not, you know, doing a good job of being stewards of our environment and the world that we were given as we should have. And we're making that problem worse with AI to some extent, but AI itself is not any better or worse than any other kind of technology as far as that goes, right? The big problem that we're having with AI is the fact that, one, we're in such a freaking hurry that we're trying to blow through all the regulations. We don't care about the impact on the people around us. There's a lot of people buying warehouses and people buying land and not telling anybody what they're going to put on it until, it's too late. And then the people show up to try to protest the fact that they're going to build a data center there and that kind of thing because they're not going through the normal processes that they would normally be going to. So it's really more about the money and the influence and the hurry at the moment, really, than it is about the AI technology itself. Now, that said, the way that the AI industries are trying to go around all of the processes and to try to build data centers in low-income neighborhoods that are powered by, on-site gas turbines in violation of local ordinances and that kind of thing, and get waivers for that because, we're going to have 18 jobs of people that work at the data center. That kind of thing, it's more a societal economic problem than it is really a technology problem.
Carl, somebody in the industry I was speaking to the other day, I've done watched a lot of videos, done a lot of research on this because, environmental impact's important to me, that he told me that because I brought up the water and the electrical usage, and he said that the water is in a closed system. So yes, up front, it is a large amount of water required, but it's a closed system and it's recycled and it's reused. I was kind of under the impression that's not true. And the other thing that he mentioned was, of course, the electrical. And he said, well, especially if we can get regulations where these data centers are having to produce their own electricity, we ought to actually, instead of seeing energy prices go up for homeowners around the area, it should actually be going down. And I know it's kind of early in the game right now, but we are seeing the complete opposite of that. So those 2 points, Carl, can you tell me, is this water in a closed system? And, B, is the electrical cost going to go down eventually?
Okay, so there are different kinds of cooling systems, right? There is a closed water cooling system that you could put in. The closed water cooling systems take more electricity than the evaporative water cooling systems, right? So you can cheap out on the amount of electricity you spend if you're willing to boil off the water, because by turning the water into steam and then letting the steam go away, you've got heat going away with it too, right? There are also cooling systems that don't use water at all. They use like some kind of a freon, not freon, but what would have been freon when I was a kid. I mean, all you need is a chemical that has a really high latent heat of evaporation, but you take that chemical, you use it in different ways, but fundamentally the physical process, the physical properties of the substance that you're using to do the turning from a gas to a liquid and then turning from a liquid back to a gas, that can be used to do cooling at whatever scale you want. You just need a lot more pipes and a lot more of it and that kind of thing. The more complicated and the more efficient that system is, the more money you're talking about. So it's a dial you can turn. So there are systems that are closed loop water systems that don't leak water, but there are systems that are cheaper that do leak water or do get rid of water. So there's no like one answer to that question.
Okay.
The other question was about the on-site electricity thing. In general, the larger a power plant that you have, the more efficient it is per watt of power that's created, right? And so if you have a bunch of little generators that are all stuck together in order to try to power a data center, that's much more likely to be less efficient than a one big power plant. And not just that, but the big power plants are a lot easier to make, not just more efficient, but to have, CO2 scrubbers and to have nitrous oxide scrubbers and to cut down on acid rain and that kind of thing, right? It's a lot easier to regulate the big power plants, and it's a lot easier to make sure that they're more environmentally friendly and are better stewards of the environment than if they're a whole bunch of little, because a lot of the little semi-truck size, a lot of the little generators are really designed not to run a data center, but they're designed or not permanently. They're designed to like be a backup when you had a hurricane and it's a couple of days until the power comes back on, right? And so they're not as efficient, and they throw a lot of crap in the atmosphere, because for a couple of days after a hurricane, it really doesn't matter that much, right? And then you take one of those things, or you take 50 of those things and you hook them all up and you run them 24/7. That's going to be a lot less efficient. It's going to throw away a lot more heat, and it's going to create a lot more pollution than if you had done the more efficient thing of building an actual power plant to actual power plant standards, assuming, of course, that you had, regulations about what power plants ought to or ought not to be able to throw into the environment, but that's a different problem.
And could they sell that power back to lower the cost of utilities in the surrounding neighborhoods?
Well, so in theory, yes, but in practice, if the big power plant that's supplying the neighborhood should be able to generate power more cheaply, more efficiently, and better for the environment than the power that's being sold back to the grid from the data center. If you had taken the effort that you spent to put all those temporary use generators, if you'd taken all the effort you spent to put those there and used it to build a new real efficient power plant, everybody would be much better off. But in order to do that, you're going to have to spend years of government red tape. You're going to have to go through a bunch of other stuff, and it takes a lot of time to do that right. And so that's not what anybody wants to do at the moment, because everybody wants their money now.
With the cost of AI, with the power plants and the social costs and all that, firstly, is AI worth it, especially considering the utility of it, where these language learning models, they have a lot of hallucinations, which is they give you bad data, right? Because they don't know anything. They just know what statistically is the most likely in the chain of words they're giving you. I've heard them called bullshit generators. Right. Like, they are the guy at the bar that is the most confident in all the facts, and if nobody's there to fact check him, oh yeah, of course, they did this.
I have a friend that calls them Dunning-Kruger accelerators.
That's clever.
So I can see an argument that they're worth it, and I can see an argument that they aren't, right? To be honest, I don't know how relevant that question really is. It's not like my opinion on whether it's worth it or not is actually going to affect anything, right? We as a society could potentially decide we don't want that. And I think, at least for some uses of AI, people are already kind of trending in that direction, and we'll see what kind of happens. Part of the economic system we have fundamentally is people vote with their dollars about whether or not something is worth it or not, right? So we'll see. At the moment, there are people who are investors, be that early investors or like the stock market, who are betting with their dollars that it's going to be worth it. And they're putting a lot of money in to prop these things up. Right now, generally, whoever it is that uses an AI, the more they use it, the more money they're making the AI company lose. Because right now, it's all being subsidized with investor money. Once we get to the point where we're not subsidizing everything with investor money, and we're actually the companies are actually having to turn a profit, and we're actually having to pay whatever the things actually cost, then we'll find out whether or not they're really worth it from the point of view of the public or not, right? The companies may or may not be able to make money.
Honestly, I'd love for that to hit sooner rather than later, the true cost of the AI to the consumer.
Well, we have
that will cut down on this AI slop and like all these things that people hate.
Yes.
Well, we have three companies going public this year, so we'll find that out very soon.
We'll see. There are three companies that are talking about going public. We'll see, because I mean, in order for them to go public, they're going to have to open up their books, and people are going to have to look at that books and decide whether or not they're going to actually let them go public. And so, depending on what their books say, they may or may not actually be able to do it.
Would you consider SpaceX to be an AI company or just a?
Well, it is now because they merged the frickin' things, but it wasn't before.
Now they're valuing themselves because they just filed the paperwork. They're valuing themselves at, I think, like $1.4 trillion. We'll see if they'll get it. But when someone values themselves that much, it makes me believe that they're not too far off, even if they are overbidding. I could be wrong, though.
I'm really curious as how those are going to go, honestly. But especially that one, because the problem is, especially with that particular one, right? Because there are so many different pieces of that octopus conglomeration that have nothing to do with each other. They got slammed together just because of the guy that happened to be at the top of the org chart. And so some people, want SpaceX to succeed, but they don't want the thing formerly known as Twitter to succeed, and they don't want the self-described mecha Hitler, also known as Grok, to succeed. And so how the actual investment group is going to shake out in terms of who's willing to spend money on that and how much they're willing to spend, I'm really curious about. That one I think is going to be kind of a mess, but we'll see what happens with it.
One of the things that people are always talking about that always gets brought up, is that, we're going to be creating Skynet, and, the robots are going to enslave us all, they're going to take over the world. And that's really scary, especially when you have places like the US government that's putting AI into autonomous kill vehicle drones, that's fed the surveillance camera data, that chooses missile targets that may or may not be little girls' schools.
Right.
That's kind of scary. And, they're saying that, we do need this, because if we don't use this technology, it's like the atomic bomb argument.
Right.
If we don't have it, then China's going to have it, Russia's going to have it, and we're going to be left behind, and we're going to be vulnerable. What do you say to that kind of attitude, that we have to go in on AI, or it's a national security concern?
There's a whole group of AI doomer types, right, that are like, it's going to kill us all and that kind of thing, right? I've been getting into it with some of on YouTube recently. There's a group that funds a lot of YouTube that are talking about AI is going to kill us all. That's called 80,000 Hours. I did a video on them. One of their big funders is a nonprofit that was founded by a guy who was one of the early investors in Anthropic, and through another foundation was one of the early investors in OpenAI. So there's a lot of overlap between the financial interests of the people that are telling everybody that AI is going to kill everyone and the financial interests of the people that are trying to make AI go as fast as possible. I don't think that's a coincidence. There's this argument that the only thing that's going to be able to protect society from a rogue AI is another AI, and so we need to have an AI before China has an AI and that kind of thing. I'm not a big proponent of that. I'm a lot more worried about the current people that are currently being harmed by the AI technology, be that the people that have, I've got, there's a big list of them, the people that have been sent to jail because the facial recognition clocked them when they weren't actually, in the same town, much less the perpetrator. There was a family that got pulled out of their cars because the flock license plate camera misidentified the letter on the license plate as being a car of interest or a car with a person of interest, and they dragged this family out and threw them on the ground at gunpoint.
And was this here, this in the U.S.?
It was in the U.S., yeah.
Oh, wow.
So there's a guy named Louis Rossmann. He's got a YouTube channel. He uses a paperclip. Clippies is kind of the organization he does. He had a video on it, the flock cameras. There was a big thing. I live in Austin. There was a big thing here where there was a protest outside of City Hall where we were trying to get the flock camera contract to not get signed the way they wanted it to get signed. And there was a lot of conversations about the different ways that those cameras had been used for bad, had made stupid mistakes and people gotten hurt or scared within an inch of their life. There's a lot of underage girls that the AIs are creating, nude looking pictures of, whether that's for their other classmates to harass them or for some unsavory, I'm not going to say the P word because we don't want to get demonetized, but there's no excuse for that. It would not be difficult for the AI companies to say, we're going to train our models, not giving them any nude pictures in order to be able to so when they generate stuff, they've never seen a nude picture, so they can't generate a nude picture, but they're not going to do that because if they did that, then they wouldn't be able to do erotica type stuff. Like they keep talking, they're going to have erotica bot kind of things. I think we need to hold the AI companies a lot more responsible for the kinds of things that they're doing to society now, rather than worry about the eventual doom. And then there's I mentioned the surveillance cameras and the facial recognition. If you were paying attention to the Edward Snowden stuff and the government surveillance and all that kind of stuff, one of the things that AI makes possible is to listen to all of the phone calls in the country in a way that it's not possible if you've just got a bunch of guys with headsets in a building trying to listen to every phone call in the country. But with AI, that's theoretically possible, right? And it will get some things wrong, and unfortunately, it will probably tend to get things wrong in the government's favor and not in the person's favor. And there's going to be people who are going to get effectively swatted, right? Where the SWAT team is going to knock down their door because the AI misunderstood the conversation. And they were talking about a video game. I'm going to do this thing in Call of Duty, and the AI is not going to understand that it was Call of Duty, and it's going to flag them as a potential terrorist or something. And, I'm betting we're going to have people that are going to have their doors knocked down for that kind of thing. So, because again, AI is really good at things where the real consequences of being wrong don't matter. And as far as I'm concerned, that's absolutely a situation where the consequences of being wrong do matter. But I don't know if the government's going to agree with me on that. I'm real concerned about the long-term implications to privacy of theoretically every text message, every email, every phone message, every phone conversation happening in the entire country able to be listened to by AI to flag things in a way that the technology was not there to be able to do that before. That's not a thing that I think the founders would have even been able to conceive of. And I don't think that their ideas about search and seizure, I think they would be a lot different if they understood that technology was possible, but we don't know, and unfortunately they didn't explicitly talk about it. So
I mean, I would say the no quartering of foreign troops would qualify as to their opinion on that. Would
it be a foreign troop
because they were very concerned about people spying on each other's, the government spying on the citizens, which we seem to have forgotten. We
just did an episode about how they read the amendments, Chris. Like
we've been alluding to and saying and talking about a little bit here and there, the American Solidarity Party, they recently, Matt's on the National Committee, so he was part of that vote where they recently tried to ban all AI for party-related business. Do you think that that's not necessarily a good policy? Is that a feasible policy in our society right now? Is that going to, if we did implement a policy like that, would that harm us in relation to what other political movements and other political parties in the country are doing? Just to get your opinion on that, Carl.
Okay, so let's take a couple of examples. So for example, one of the things that's really useful that AI does a really good job of is making transcripts of meetings. Right, and picking out action items and that kind of thing, right? And so saying we're not going to use an AI to transcribe our meetings, and we're going to have a person that's going to sit there and is going to write down all of the minutes and all that kind of stuff. Well, unfortunately, that person's not really, having done that before, that person's not going to be able to participate in the discussion, really. You know what I mean? Because they're too busy having to take notes. So the question is basically, do you want somebody that that's their job, or do you want that person to be able to participate? I'm assuming that position would be like a volunteer position instead of a paid position.
I did it at the last national convention.
And so in that kind of thing, if you were going to have a volunteer do it anyway, I don't really see the point in saying we're not going to allow an AI to do a transcription kind of thing, right? I can imagine situations where you wanted to use an AI to do like language translation, so you could have your website or your content available to people that don't speak English or Spanish as the primary language. I don't know that would be the best thing for you guys from a trying to get your message out there standpoint. And a lot of times, I mean, even though the content that it creates as a auto language translator, what I found is that if you've got a thing where you've got the foreign language that's been generated, when people that are native speakers of that see that, they're able to participate in a way they weren't before. And a lot of times you'll get an email from them that says, oh, by the way, you shouldn't phrase it this way. You should probably do this kind of thing, right? And people will kind of help volunteer to make the language better, even though the AI didn't make it quite as good, because they're able to participate in the process more than they would have been before. So I don't know how important that is. If you want to participate in the current, at the risk of getting too political, the current White House versus Iran Lego movie, social media virality.
Which by the way,
kind of
fantastic production values on those.
So if you want to be able to play in that game, you're not going to be able to play in that game if you're not going to be able to use AI. There's that kind of thing. I don't know if you want to play in that game. There's potential virality there and potential attention there, but also potential risk there.
We don't want to play in that game, but you have to be relevant. Is the unfortunate part of the landscape of how everything's changed since 2016.
So I would probably be more likely to try to phrase it in such a way that we would not use AI in place of a person we would normally be paying. If you're using AI to free up a volunteer so that they can participate more in the conversation, and that's not a position you would normally be paying people for, because you're not that large of an organization yet, then I can imagine that would be a use for AI that would be okay, at least in my head. Everybody's got to make their own decisions, right? Everybody's got their own kind of where they draw the line kind of thing. But there are uses of AI that I think would probably be useful for you folks. But I certainly can imagine making a stand that says, anything that we in the past have paid a person to do, we're going to continue to pay the person to do, and we're not going to replace that money that we would have spent with AI instead.
So if I can just chime in quick, since we were on that subject, and sure. I'm passionate about it. I mean, it bothers me, and I completely understand, because the way I am more skeptical of AI than I really let on. I'm concerned about it from an environmental standpoint, from a moral standpoint, because of what can be done with it. As a Christian, just how I've interpreted the Bible, I think in the end of things, the beast system, AI is going to play a major role in that. So I have my concerns with it. But I also can separate those concerns out, that it's just a technology that has come about, and there are uses for it, and there are ways to use it, for good. And as a party that is heavily reliant on volunteer support, so for example, I work on the newsletter. I've pretty much been formatting the newsletters. I'm a creative person, but I know my way around Photoshop, but I'm not great at graphic generation or anything. So I've used ChatGPT to make graphics before, and it's been nixed. They won't allow it in the newsletter. I'm worried about the party's wholesale ban on AI. I understand it's not great social media content, but in my opinion, AI slop, as it's called, really, when you're online, the only people who don't like the AI generated content are the people who are commenting to say it's AI slop, and then you get to the comment section bogged down with that crap. Another criticism that's been levied is our party really believes economically in distributism, and they've said it made the accusation that it's antithetical to distributism, and AI now gives the means of production to everybody. For example, I do not have the capabilities, or did not have the capabilities, of interior design. I was not going to invest in all the programs that you rack up thousands of dollars. And let's just be honest, I'm not the greatest at it. But now with AI programs, I can do the interior design portion of my job. So means of production, and like you were saying, Chris, you can take this with those tools. Now the lowest level person can perform these tasks, whereas before that might have been something that would have to have gone up the chain. That's something that I'm concerned that the party might be getting lost in the weeds on, as well as we are a party that wants to support everyone, especially, people with disabilities, people in who are lower on the social class ladder. And we have one member, Skylar. Skylar's blind. He makes great use of AI. It's a great technology for him. And so that's what I'm concerned about, is alienating those people, by what's the greater good? What's the, versus evil here? Are we going to go all out or on AI and alienate that section of people that we were supposed to represent, or can we find a happy medium? I know that's a long tangent. I know that's probably not your thing, Carl.
I understand the importance of taking a moral stand, right? And saying, okay, this is where we think our values are, right? And we're going to put a flag in the ground, and we're going to say this is what we're going to do. And then saying, okay, now that we have made that policy, and this is a very important, in my opinion, having been around for a long time, this is a very important part of governing. Now that we have made that stand, and now that we have seen the implications of what that stand has caused, are we going to, as a governing group, are we going to modify that based on new information that we have that we really couldn't have found out before we put the flag in the ground in the first place, right? And now that people have brought up specific cases, like, we've got a person that wants to contribute to the newsletter that's blind, is that okay or not, right? That kind of thing. Then, an intelligent organization, I shouldn't say it that way, but
fair enough.
A responsive organization would say, okay, we now have this new use case that we didn't think about when we created this law, right? So, let's talk about whether or not we want to amend this policy based on this new information that's come in, right? I mean, I think that in this country, a lot of times we don't do a good job of realizing, okay, here's the implication of this policy that we created, of this law that we wrote. We need to take that new information and we need to amend the laws in order to make things better, because there's this thing that we didn't think of. You know what I mean? And when we get around to the point where we do make those kinds of changes, generally it's far too late and people have already been harmed. So I don't think that having taken the moral stand is necessarily wrong, but I would say that you should be responsible at this point for looking at what the consequences of the decision and the moral stand that you made, and then finding anyone that was hurt by that or anyone that was negatively affected by that, and then taking that into account and deciding whether or not you want to amend that kind of policy.
Carl, before we let you go, I would, is there anything that you would like to say? Anything that you would like to promote? Maybe your channel? That's how I found you.
So I'm Internet of Bugs on YouTube. You can also find my socials and information on me at internetofbugs.com, the website. I would say, if I want to leave anybody with one particular message, it's that AI is a tool, and AI can be used for good and evil, and that the people that primarily are talking about AI generally have an agenda. If you're listening to people talk about AI and they work for an AI company, or they're an investor in an AI company, keep in mind that it's important to them that you believe the thing that they're saying, which may or may not be true. And so for those kinds of things, look for other sources, do your own research. Don't always believe the press releases and the articles based on the press releases and the YouTube videos and the influencer information based on the headlines from the articles that are based on the press releases, because there's a lot of stuff out there about AI that's gotten blown out of proportion, that's based on people trying to do the same kind of thing they do with crypto and a bunch of other Enron and a bunch of other stuff, where they really want you to believe a certain thing so that they can make a lot of money from it.
All right, thank you, Carl. It's been a pleasure having you on our.
Thanks for having me. It's been a great conversation.
And with that, I'm Chris.
I'm Carvell.
And I'm Matt.
And if Roko's Basilisk happens to find this, don't worry. We're on your side. And thank you, everyone. Have a great day.